Well, thank you so much, and good morning, everyone. It's great to be with you. It's always great to be back at Woodside. I think it's been almost, I wouldn't say exactly, but pretty close to 2 years since I stood here on a Sunday morning, and it's great to be back as always. Thank you so much, Chris, and the entire staff here at Woodside for partnering with us at Embrace the Truth to talk about the credibility of the Christian faith. We want to do it with every questioner we encounter. Now, John had teased during the announcements, and I want to give a little more detail about something that I'm very excited to announce in terms of our partnership with Woodside as well. We have a regional conference. It's not just a Woodside conference, by the way. It's happening here, but it's a regional conference called the Remind Conference, and Remind is based on Romans chapter 12, verse 2, where we are called to be renewed transformed by the renewal of our mind. And oftentimes the culture thinks that Christians believe that they are transformed by the removal of their mind. But this is a conference that says, no, that's the exact opposite of it. We engage in hard questions. We want to engage in hard questions. And so on November 20th and 21st, the Remind Conference is coming to Woodside. It's a 2-day cultural apologetics conference for Christians ages 18 to 30. Over that 2 days, we'll face the toughest, hardest challenges the culture is asking about the collision of culture and faith. So you have questions about AI, about gender, about culture, about different religions, about science and faith, about meaning, about suicide, about all these things. This is the conference for you if you're between ages 18 and 30. So if you are a young adult in that age bracket, or if you know and love a young adult, or if you even have mild feelings about a young adult, invite them to come to the Remind Conference, where we want you to see Jesus. Not just see Jesus in his personhood, but see that Jesus is not afraid of tough questions. In fact, he invites us to use our mind and have our minds renewed as we engage in those tough questions. So the details are on the slide behind me, remindconference.com. You can sign up right now. We'd love to see you there. The topic this morning is a bit of a heady topic. It's going to be sort of a preview in some senses of Remind, where we like to address the questions the culture is actually asking, not the questions we hope it's asking. The culture is asking right now all kinds of questions really centered around this idea. There's two words really, reality and identity. What's real and who am I? Those are the big questions happening right now in the midst of our culture. Now, that reminds me of a story I heard about these two sailors, these two British Navy guys who get some shore leave. And so the boat docks and they go and they leave the ship and they go out and they really enjoy their shore leave. They haven't had it in a while and they decide to really enjoy it. So they go to one pub and then another and then another and then another. And by the time that they're completely, almost brain cell-less, with all that they've done, they realize, hey, we're going to be late getting back to the ship, but we don't even know where we are anymore. And so they stumble out of the last pub they find themselves in. They don't recognize the street they're on. They have no idea how to get back to the ship. They're in a real fix. So they're asking people, how do we get back? Do you know where this thing is at? I don't know. And they have slurred speech and no one understands them. But as they're stumbling around, they see a guy coming up in a very crisp naval uniform. In fact, he's got all kinds of ribbons on his chest. So this guy's been around quite a bit so that we can ask this guy, where is the ship? They don't know it, but he's an admiral, actually. So they go with their shirts untucked and their thing unbuttoned, and they stop and they slovenly sort of ask him a question. Hey, man, do you know where we are? And the admiral's incensed at their informality and the way they look, and he straightens his jacket and says, young man, do you know who I am? And the one guy says to his friend, he says, man, we're in a real fix now. We don't know where we are, and he doesn't know who he is. Culture is a lot like that. We don't know where we are, and we don't know who we are. And all these guides are telling us where to go. But the reality is, they don't even know who they are either. Now, this idea of reality collapse, which is part of the title of what I'm speaking about, I heard of this phrase, reality collapse, about a couple of years ago when I was doing some research on artificial intelligence, and I was listening to or watching a video called The AI Dilemma by two AI researchers named Asa Raskin and Tristan Harris. And they were talking about third contact with AI. Now, we've had a lot of contact with AI for far longer than you might realize. The minute you typed in an address into a computer back in the day into MapQuest, remember MapQuest? When you did that and it spit out, and when you're my age, you were like, oh my goodness, this thing knows everything. And it spit out these directions that you'd have to print out and actually look at, almost like a real map. You were using AI back then. It was a weak form of AI, but it was AI. And then it got better and better and better over time. Now we're engaged in what's called third contact with AI. Third contact is the idea that not only do you give it information and it gives you something in terms of a result, but now it will respond to you in an interactive way, and so you begin to interact with its interactions. And in fact, with agentic AI, now you can tell it to do a task and it'll do something with no supervision whatsoever, and it just goes and does it. That's third contact. So they were talking about all the benefits that are gonna come from that. And by the way, there are lots. By the time I'm done with this talk, you might think I'm anti-AI. I'm not. I just think that we overuse it, and I'm very cautious about what it means in terms of the worldview behind the effort to get you to use it all the time, everywhere. There's a lot of benefits, but they also listed some of the detriments, and they were talking about some of the things that could happen if you overuse artificial intelligence or if we're not critical about its dissemination. So we started listing off all these negative features, like credit card frauds and phone scams. I mean, you can get a call right now from an AI that sounds just like your son or daughter asking for money because the car broke down and they needed money to get a repair. It's a fake call, it's not really them, and it'll respond to you as if it's them because it sampled their voice from videos found online. That's a real thing. And so they went through all these things and deep fakes and videos that can like influence political opinions and even influence the way wars are fought or the way economic policy is done. All these various ways in which AI can influence things. And then amidst these 40 different things they were listing, the word reality collapse was in there. They went this and this and this and this and reality collapse and then this and this and this. But whoa, 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 reality collapse? That should be the number one thing on your list. Who cares about credit card fraud if the reality is gonna collapse? They spent 1.5 seconds talking about that. Like, well, I gotta think about this more. So I began to look into the culture to see where are the places where, in fact, reality seems to be collapsing, or at least our perception of reality is collapsing, because reality itself can't collapse. It just is what it is. One person defined pain as what it feels like when reality bumps into you. No matter how much you try to avoid it, it does, in fact, sort of rise up. But our perception of it's beginning to collapse. I remember a story about a guy named Jason Allen. Jason Allen is an artist, and he submitted a piece to an art contest that he entered into. It's an art contest out west. Let's see if I can show you an image of that piece of art, if we have that. That's the piece of art he submitted to this art contest. It's amazing. It's beautiful in terms of its composition, its style, its use of color, its use of light. He won first prize. That's not a surprise. What ended up happening, though, is that they discovered that Jason Allen didn't actually paint that. What turns out is that no one actually painted it. That image was generated by Midjourney, which is an AI software. Now, the other artists got really upset and said, wait a minute, that's cheating. We actually did the art. This guy just typed some stuff into a prompt, and this thing did the work for him. He shouldn't get first prize. Give the second prize guy the first prize, and so on. And so they got upset. Well, the judges made a response, and they said, well, look, we're gonna let him keep the prize. And the reason is because it took at least a little bit of artistic ability to type the prompts in that created the image. And the artist's response was just like your response. Baloney. In response to all that criticism, Jason Allen, who is an artist, this is what he said. He said, it's over. This is not going to stop. Art is dead. AI won, humans lost. And I remember thinking to myself, what a bizarre thing to brag about. What a bizarre thing for an artist to say, that art is dead. What a bizarre thing for an artist to brag about the fact that AI is better at art than human beings are. Isn't art the very thing that makes us human in the first place, that distinguishes us from the lower animals and especially machines? And now this soulless thing comes and beats us at the very thing that makes us human in the first place? Why are you bragging? And I began to ask myself, what accounts for this? Is there something in human nature? Is there a source I can go to look to see what accounts for the fact that we brag about our own destruction? Then I saw it in another place too, by the way. It's not just there, it's also with the ideologies of identity. Identity ideologies run rampant now. In fact, they go back to the core of what it means to be human, male or female. And I remember reading an article, it was an op-ed by Andrea Chu in the New York Times. Andrea Chu transitioned from male to female and wrote about the experience. And in that article, talked about how Chu was not suicidal before the hormones, but became suicidal after. And after the surgery said, I am a marshland of regret, often suicidal now. And by the time that article is over, as Chu chronicles the horrors that she's gone through, or he's gone through this whole thing, Chu actually says, and anybody who wants to do this should be encouraged to do it. Reality begins to collapse. What accounts for that kind of a response? And Alan's response, what accounts for this? What I want to sustain for you in the time we have, and it's not a lot, but I'm going to try my best to make it through. What I want to sustain for you in the time we have is that the biblical record, the Bible actually has the ability to not only guide us because it predicts these things through its predictive power, but also through its conceptual credibility. It tells us that what it says is true, and then from that conceptual credibility, it provides for us a remarkable remedy. So it gives us predictive power, a conceptual credibility to provide us a remarkable remedy. It was Leslie Newbigin who coined the phrase eternally contemporary when he's talking about Jesus, and I think that's true. The biblical record is our eternal contemporary as well. What a beautiful phrase, the idea of being eternally contemporary. It means that no matter what the issue is that seems novel in our current culture, the Bible, this ancient book written 2,000 years ago or 3,500 years ago or even older than that, in a culture far different than our culture, in a language far different than our languages, at a time far different than our time, somehow says something about our current culture now. It's as if the God who is beyond time wrote it. I want to defend that for you today. So as I do, I'd like you to turn in your Bibles to Acts chapter 17. And I'm going to start in verse 17. I'm going to skim through it and kind of race through the text, but it does provide us a moment because in many ways, if you're a Christian and you're talking about the credibility of the gospel message, you find yourself in the same position the Apostle Paul did in Acts chapter 17. In this particular passage, the Apostle Paul, a Jew from Tarsus, a Greek city with Roman citizenship, finds himself in Athens. Athens is the center of intelligent discussion. It is the center of philosophy. It's where all the best and the brightest go to speak on very, very difficult topics and challenge each other all the time. And Paul, the seemingly backwards guy from a backwater province of the Roman Empire, finds himself in the middle of the cultural elite. And the Bible says, so he reasoned in the synagogue with the Jews and the devout persons, and in the marketplace every day with those who happened to be there. Some of the Epicurean and Stoic philosophers also conversed with him, and some said, what does this babbler wish to say? Others said, he seems to be a preacher of foreign divinities. Put a pin in that, that's going to be important later. Because he was preaching Jesus and the resurrection. And they took him and brought him to the Areopagus. Now that goes from the center of learning to the center of learning, where the elite of the elite are, because they want to hear what he's saying. Now Paul, in verse 22, standing in the midst of the Areopagus, said, men of Athens, I perceive that in every way you are very religious, for as I passed along and observed the objects of your worship, I also found an altar with this inscription, to the unknown God. What therefore you worship as unknown, this I proclaim to you. Pause there for a second, because Paul's boldness is pretty amazing here. He's saying to the intellectual elite, who just got done calling him a babbler, this God you don't know about, it's because you guys are ignoramuses. Now, think about this. The Greeks have a pantheon of gods, whether it's Zeus or Hera or Poseidon or Ares or Athena, especially Athena in the middle of Athens. They have all these gods and goddesses and all these statues everywhere. But all those gods and goddesses have origin stories. They began to exist. If you look at Greek mythology, and by the way, this is true of the Babylonians, this is true of the Assyrians, this is true of the Egyptians. All of those gods have origin stories. They began to exist. And they came from something else. They're contingent. They can only be explained by something that came before them, which means they're not self-existent and they're not all-powerful. And so because of that, because of their limited quality, they're just like us. They're petulant and they're jealous and they're all these things. And so these Athenians are worried that if we don't put an altar to an unknown God, that unknown God might get angry about being ignored and destroy the city of Athens. So to appease that God, we put to the unknown God. And Paul says, not only is your lack of knowledge of who that God is ignorant, but your lack of knowledge of what it means to be a God itself is ignorant. How do I know? What does he say next? He says, the God who made the world and everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in temples made by man, nor is he served by human hands as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all mankind life and breath and everything. So here's the point. Paul is saying that in a very sophisticated way, which I'll show you in a minute, but in a very sophisticated way, he's saying your conception of God and goddess is lacking. And therefore your gods and goddesses can't possibly be God because they need something. But the one who created everything doesn't need anything at all. So with that in mind, that frame in mind, I want to look at the culture that we currently find ourselves in, the Areopagus you and I find ourselves in as we begin to explore these big issues. Where we are now is very interesting because we used to think of the human being as something robust, as something thick and meaty and beautiful. We had this understanding of what it meant to be human because we were souls. How many souls are aboard that ship? How many souls went to church on Sunday? You know, he's a wonderful old soul. We used to refer to ourselves as a soul. And what that meant is that we had a transcendent quality. We had something about us that was immaterial, that didn't depend on the physical, but it was connected to the physical, that our bodies were real. They weren't born wrong, although they were born in a world of decay because of sin. We still had a valuable thing called a body and that mind, that immaterial mind, were connected to each other. But that soul was meant for communion. You were meant to actually interact in an immaterial way, not dependent upon biology, with another soul. And then our souls collectively are meant to interact with the immaterial source of all creation, who is God himself. And so we had this understanding, this robust understanding that we were spiritual and we were physical. But then over the course of some centuries, we began to over-psychologize and under-spiritualize what it meant to be human. And so we shaved off layers of what it meant to be human, and we went from the soul to this thinner idea of the self. And so we still had communication, we still believed in the communication of human beings, but now everything was about how does it affect my psyche? How does someone else's actions affect how I think about myself, and then how do my thoughts about myself affect other people? And so we became social, we stayed social, but we lost that sense of transcendent connection, going from the soul to the self. But in recent decades, we've shaved off the layers of what it means to be human even more now, so that we now have this understanding of what it means to be human with a paper-thin, unbiblical idea, and that idea is identity. It's paper-thin now. It's no thicker than the bumper stickers we slap on the back of our Subarus to tell everybody our political opinions. And because it's that thin, it's also fragile, which means it's not held on to anything of substance more than the glue it takes to put on a bumper sticker, and you can just change it whenever you feel like it. And if you don't feel like changing it, but the winds and the rains come, they wear away at the bumper sticker and fade it or tear it off completely, because we are fragile. And into this fragility of identity, where we vaunt it as this idea that somehow helps us, we fail to realize it's just a mask that can be removed so easily. But ironically, the cultural responses to this are not that new. We've been doing this for quite some time, thinking of ourselves in a way that's not actually true to what's true. And in the middle of that paper thinness, we are wrestling with two competing claims. Because we're so thin, we can't really deal with it. Here are the two competing claims about what it means to be human. Now, this is important. You're required to believe both of these claims, even though both of these claims are contradictory. But you're required to believe both. You don't have to select one or the other. You have to believe both. And because they're contradictory, it's very hard to actually reconcile the contradiction. Claim number one, you're a machine. That's all you are. You're just a machine. You're nothing more than biochemical reactions to external stimuli and some brain makeup. You're just a moist robot that responds to programming. You think you have free will. You think you have a consciousness. You think you have morality. You think that that thing called love is really nothing more than oxytocin and all these things in your brain that are causing chemical reactions. But all you are is a machine. That's it. Richard Dawkins was famous for saying, "We are machines for propagating DNA. It is every living object's sole reason for living." That's claim one. Claim two, you are God. You are the God of your own skull-sized world, and whatever you feel is whatever everyone has to affirm. And so if you feel a certain way, no matter what reality actually is, you can actually dictate how other people see you and see the world around them so that they have to obey and have no other gods before you. Of course, they have their preferences too, and you shall have no other gods before them, so it results in chaos, but that's the point. The point is everyone is their sovereign God of their own skull-sized world. So you see those two claims? They both can't be true. You can't be God and a mere machine. And so because the human mind craves logic, because we crave coherence, we struggle to make a reconciliation between I'm just a machine, but I'm also God. If I'm a God, what if I'm just a machine? How do I make sense of this? And so we go back and forth and back and forth. And at some point, learned helplessness sets in and you just stop trying to resolve it. And you base it not on logic, you base the world on feeling. And anxiety sets in. So it's no wonder that Jonathan Haidt, in his book, The Anxious Generation, talks about the way in which Gen Z, because of these identity issues, is now the most anxious generation in history, largely because of technology and this rampant misunderstanding or lack of understanding of what we are. There have been two secular attempts, non-Christian attempts, to actually resolve the contradiction. Two that look at this and say, I can resolve the machines or God contradiction. The first one is the one I want to center most on, which is what I call AI mania or transhumanism. Again, my issue is not artificial intelligence. My issue is what's the worldview behind trying to get you to use it as much as they want you to use it? What's going on there? So transhumanism is the idea that we can improve on the model. The human beings are imperfect and we are also limited in our design, and that through medical technology and software technology, we can eventually improve on the model to the point where we become post-human. A post-human is no longer an actual human. You've transcended what it means to be human and you're something greater and something bigger and something way more advanced than what it means to be human. Now the chief vehicle right now for that is artificial intelligence. So it's important you understand this. The AI we're using right now is not generally intelligent. General intelligence, or AGI, is the idea that artificial intelligence might become human-level intelligent. And it's not. Frankly, it's not even close. But the hope is that we're going to get there, that we're going to have a moment very soon, some are saying, I think that's probably a fantasy, but that we're going to have artificial general intelligence, and when AI becomes human-level intelligent, it's going to start to, because of its processing power, it's going to start to advance at a geometric rate. Well, it'll get faster and faster and smarter and better and far outstrip human beings and the collection of humanity very quickly. It'll far outstrip us very, very quickly, and we'll be left behind unless we merge with it. And so, since you're just a machine, all you are, there's no soul, you're just a machine, you're just data, you're just a collection of data. We can eventually figure out ways to download the data in your brain to a storage medium and then upload that into the artificial intelligence, and so that we can merge with it. And when we merge with it, the machine becomes God. Because we're no longer bound by our bodies, and we're no longer bound by rudimentary communication skills and all these things. And so we are no longer going to be subject to decay and sickness and death, and we'll be immortal. It sounds religious, doesn't it? In fact, Jonathan Horgan, writing for Scientific American, said that this idea of the merger with technology is the rapture of the nerds. Now, lest you think that I'm just pulling this out of nowhere, one of the chief apologists, one of the chief evangelists for this idea of the merger is a man named Ray Kurzweil. And in a movie called The Transcendent Man, at the end of this movie, he's like one of the chief advocates for this. He says at the end of the movie, if you ask me if there's a God, I would say, not yet. So it's this working towards that. So you're just a machine, but you're a clever machine. Take heart. We've created this machine that's godlike. It knows everything. It seems to be everywhere, and pretty soon it'll do anything, and you can merge with it so you'll have those same qualities too. So contradiction solved. You are a machine that can become God. The second ideology is the one about identity, is that yes, your body is this machine thing, but it's not a prison for you to be trapped by. It becomes a plaything that you can change based on preferences and needs. And I don't mean glib about it. What I'm saying is that it can be changed based on your preferences and your feelings. And so you are a God who is in this prison of a body, but now we have achieved the ability to change the body as we see fit, or not, depending on how we see these things. But the efforts at these things, these efforts at divinity, they don't work. They just don't. I mean, when you look at the research coming out of OpenAI, which is the people who make ChatGPT, Microsoft, and MIT, what you see is that the more you use artificial intelligence for creative purposes, to generate that essay, to write that poem, to paint that painting, to generate the presentation at work, the more you use it to do your thinking for you, the less thinking you're capable of doing. It's called cognitive debt. And so when you incur cognitive debt, they find this, and it's getting stronger and stronger. The evidence for this is that people lose their sense of creativity, they lose their sense of judgment and discernment, they lose their memories, and they find it very difficult to connect with human beings the more you use it. So here's the irony. In our effort to elevate us to godhood, we have reduced ourselves to lower than machines. We're not even calculating things anymore. We're not remembering anything anymore. We're becoming less than we were. Do you see how ironic that is? In the effort to make us more, we're actually making us less. The same is true for the identity stuff. When you look at no matter what kind of things you go through, the various efforts have resulted in, by far, on the whole, not in every case, but on the whole, far higher suicide rates and suicidal thoughts, lots and lots of physical damage, and societal issues are happening over and over again. So in our efforts to elevate ourselves to godhood, we are becoming less and less. We're hurting ourselves. It reminds me of what T.S. Eliot said, is that ours is an age that advances progressively backward. Now here's my point. Paul was talking about foreign divinities to these Areopagites because they had their other divinities. He's speaking about this unknown God. Jesus becomes a foreign divinity in our current culture because we're God and he's not us, and we don't like it. Point number one, the Bible has predictive power because it predicted this long before it actually happened. This idea that we want to become God in whatever way, even if it hurts us, is biblical. It was predicted. And a book that predicts the human condition with uncanny accuracy in a way that sustains itself over the centuries is unlikely to be the concoction of a bunch of fishermen and some shepherds. It's probably sourced from the one who created those fishermen and shepherds. And so in Genesis chapter 3, you see this predicted, that Adam and Eve are placed in the garden and they're given free reign over the garden. They can do whatever they want in this garden, but they can't eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil because of their imperfection. They simply can't handle the idea that they can master good and evil, and so they eat of it anyway, despite being told by God that the day you eat of it, you can't handle it, so you're gonna die from it, and they go ahead and do it anyway. They got the warning ahead of time, and they did it anyway. Why? They did it because in the human condition, there is this insatiable desire to become God. Genesis 3, Genesis 11, the Tower of Babel story. They build a tower that goes up to the heavens. So God says, be fruitful, multiply, and go out into the world and explore this diverse world that I've created for you. They said, no thanks, we're not gonna go out, we're gonna go up. And we're gonna become you, to their detriment. You see it time and again throughout the Bible. The Bible keeps predicting that we want to become God. And now we're sitting in this digital Eden, in this moment where the transhumanist says, the failure of Eden was not that it was immoral. The failure of Eden was that it was premature. Now we have the technology to finally become God. And the Bible predicts it. So predictive power. But the thing it gives you and me is also conceptual credibility. It doesn't just predict the way we are, but it gives a conceptual credibility that says that in the middle of all your issues, you can trust what this Bible actually says. Let me make a case for that for you in just a minute or two. Here's what I'm getting at. Oftentimes when you see discussions about artificial intelligence as an example, people will say, well, look, what evidence do you have of a soul? And if the soul is because it's creative, because we think of things, because we have ideas about this and about that, well, this machine that has no soul, that we created ourselves, can do all of those things, and in some ways it can do it better than us. And so what ends up happening is we start to believe, and more young people are starting to doubt whether or not they have a transcendent soul. Are they the mere identity I described before, because this machine can do what they can do and it can do it better? But the reality is this: when you look into artificial intelligence, you realize something. AI is just a simulation of human intelligence. It's actually not intelligent in the classical way we think of it as intelligence. It's not even close. In fact, Alison Gopnik, who is a researcher on these issues and on human development, said this, that the average human 4-year-old learns so much more efficiently and so much better than artificial intelligence does. AI does things fast. The human mind does things efficient. So the average human 4-year-old is actually able to outcompete artificial intelligence and how it learns. That means that AI is simply a simulation, a cheap imitation of the genuine article, a cheap imitation of it. So here's the point. Here's my argument. If it takes billions of dollars and decades of effort by the finest minds in the history of the world to create a cheap imitation of a mind, how much greater is the mind that created those minds in the first place? Now someone might say this, but wait a minute, if intelligence begets intelligence, then who made God? If God is the intelligence that created us, and intelligence is begat by something before that, well, then who created God? Then who created the God of God? Who created the God of the God of God? You see, you can go through this infinite thing. Well, the reality is the philosophers have addressed this over the centuries, and they've been doing this for quite some time. Remember what I said about the gods of Egypt and the gods of the Greeks and these kind of things, where they were talking about the idea that their gods have origins. They're contingent. They need something else to explain them. So the world is divided up into two things. Contingent things, things that have to be explained, like the chairs you're sitting in, or the air you're breathing, or the very molecules that make up the universe. And non-contingent things, things that don't need to be explained by anything outside of themselves. They explain themselves in virtue of being the kind of thing that it is. So everything is contingent when you think about it. My phone, you, the air we're breathing, the universe itself, it all depends on something outside of itself to explain it. But you can't have an infinite number of explanations. Okay, follow me on this. You can't have an infinite set of explanations because you can't have an infinite set of anything in a time-bound world. Here's an example. You and I are sitting here now. Let's call now moment 0. Okay, we're in moment 0 right now. Call yesterday moment -1. Tomorrow is moment +1. And then the day before yesterday is moment -2. And on. It keeps going, right? So you keep going, -1, -2, -3, all the way to infinity in the past. You can't have that. Here's why. Because you and I are sitting here now. How can you possibly count the number of days and moments to get to now if it's infinite in the past? Where do you start? You can't start anywhere. So you can't have an infinite set of things that are time-bound or universe-bound. You have to have something that begins everything that itself doesn't have a beginning. That's logically so. You have to have that. And so whatever causes everything cannot itself be caused. So nothing would beget God's mind, because God's mind is the uncreated mind. It's the mind that always exists. Now, here's where the Bible comes into play. When Moses encounters the burning bush, which is God's manifestation to him, and God commissions him to go and tell the Egyptians to let my people go, Moses is familiar with the gods of Egypt, all of whom have origin stories, Ra and Osiris and Horus and all these various, Isis and all these various gods and goddesses. And he says, look, I'm gonna have to go and tell them about you. And you're gonna have to compete with their gods. Who will I say has sent me? What is your name? The philosophers have been going through the contingent versus the necessary being, saying that a necessary being always exists. And what God says to Moses is that in distinction to these false gods, all of whom have origin stories and therefore can't be gods because only God can self-exist, you tell them my name. My name is Yahweh. I am. The God of language, the God of the intellect, the supreme mind, takes the arguments of 2,000 years of philosophers and condenses them down to his name. That's efficiency. That's credibility. That's the God of the Bible. So we go from predictive power to conceptual credibility. And now the question becomes, what is the remedy he provides for you and me? Because our predicament is that we, though being made in the image of God, don't think that's enough. We want to become God in whose image we're made. So we try to ascend to godhood. And that's a cardinal sin because we're rejecting the very purpose for which we were created, which is relationship with God. And so we've rejected him and incurred an incredible, an infinite debt based on what we've done. So God himself incarnates the image of God in whom we're made. You know, the Bible says, you wanna know what the image of God is? People say, what's the image of God? Look to the Bible. The Bible says that he is, meaning Jesus, he is the image of the invisible God and the exact imprint of his nature. So the image of God, here's the irony in the poetry of this. The image of God comes to earth to tell people in whose image he was made, who were trying to become him, you're not me. But I'll go on that cross in your place and pay a debt you deserve to pay to get an infinite eternity you don't deserve to have, to redeem you from your desire to rise to God. I can make that so that you have relationship with me once again. I can make you a soul again. I can thicken you back up. And there's no longer an identity crisis because you know who and what you are. How do I know it's true? Because the history shows that Jesus not only died on the cross, but he rose from the dead as a fact. Conceptual credibility, remarkable remedy. I want to end with this. We look around and we try to find answers to the contradictions, and then we only end up hurting ourselves. And it's heated out there. You disagree with somebody? There's a lot of heat. Our desires generate plenty of heat. But it's Christ who comes to soothe that. John Greenleaf Whittier says this in his poem about the middle of our heat of our desires that are leading us astray. Drop thy still dews of quietness till all our striving cease. Remove from our souls the strains and stress, and let our ordered lives confess the beauty of thy peace. Speak through the heat of our desire, thy coolness and thy balm. Let sense be dumb, let flesh retire. Speak through the earthquake, wind, and fire. O still small voice of calm. In a world that's trying to get you to become something you're not, and plays on that desire you and I have, Christ comes to instill that still small voice of calm and soothe you and tell you, you don't need upgrading, you just need redemption. Let's pray. Father, thank you so much for the gift of your word, for the gift of your son, for the gift of the conceptual credibility to get us through the predicted predicament we were going to be in, and you offer us this remarkable remedy. We are grateful, Lord. May all those who know you get excited about sharing this with other people, Lord. And may anyone here who does not know you, who's looking for that sense of thickness, of an identity that's now transformed into the soulishness that you've originally intended for us. May they know who you are, and they know who they are in you through these words and through this service. In Jesus' name, amen. God bless you guys. Thank you so much.